this individual was crucified exactly as Jesus was crucified, as described in the Bible, in the Gospels of the New
Right.
Testament. And that has to be explained.
Welcome, Gracious Gang, to the Gracious Guest Show. I'm your host, Mike Creavey. As always, delighted to have you here with me today, where we're going to jump back into one of our favorite topics around here, which is the Shroud of Turin, with one of our favorite guests, one of your favorite guests, I know for sure. I'm delighted to welcome back to the Gracious Guest Show Bob Rucker, who is a nuclear engineer by trade, and now in his retirement, he's dedicated himself tremendously to the study of the Shroud, and Bob's been on the program a number of times where he's really explored, especially from his particular bailiwick of nuclear, his nuclear engineering background, the neutron absorption theory that he's postulating here with regard to the image formation of the Shroud, and also the carbon dating throw-off. He's his own hypothesis about these things. But in this video, he's going to take an especially close look at questions and comments that you've all shared in the past. Our last video where we talked about all kinds of different things that Bob's been researching generated an awful lot of commentary, a lot of questions and comments. And Bob, God bless him, he went through hundreds and hundreds of comments and brought together all of that into this deeper presentation than we even got into last time, where he's going to address a couple different things, even the history of the Shroud, as well as some other surprises along the way. I don't want to ruin any more of it, but let's just go ahead and jump right in to a Q&A with the nuclear engineer all about the Shroud of Turin. Check it out. Bob Rucker's back on the Gracious Guest Show. Bob, thanks so much for joining me again.
Yeah, yes, glad to be here.
Well, we were just talking before we hit record here, the popularity of the information that you've been bringing here about the Shroud, and I'm really excited because I cheated ahead here and looked at your slides beforehand. So we want to get right to it here. That after this last chat we had a couple months ago at the time of this recording, generated an awful lot of comments, awful lot of questions. Occasionally you get some comments that don't seem very sincere or very serious or very charitable, but for the most part, even the ones that might be a little more, contrary or a little more, have a little bit of an edge to them, still may be very, good, legitimate questions. So I just saw that you pulled a bunch together here, and should I just go ahead and you want to start going through those? Basically, I'll put them up here if you want to carry us through here. And I did notice, by the way, you have some additional material I'm excited to see here in the context of addressing some of these questions that are things that I don't think we've discussed before. So I'm excited to chat with you. So go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready.
Yes, okay. So the last podcast or video I did with you was put up on November 1st. So it's been 2.5 months now. And there's somewhere in the order of 67,000 hits at this point.
Yeah.
I accessed the comments and questions 4 days ago at this point, when there was 606 total, of which many of those were evidently replies, because I counted 268 primary comments. So, and those are the ones that I've gone through. I looked at every one of those, categorized them, kind of abbreviated them, edited them as needed to try and condense it down. If I had anywhere from 6 to 10 hours, I could talk through all of them, but most people would not be willing to stay and watch that long. So we're going to try and do this in an hour. If
we'll go a little more probably, but yeah, around there, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. And so that's what we're doing here. So I'm responding to comments from the previous presentation. So as we go through this, if people start wondering what I was talking about previously, it's available. Go back and look at it. That's all I can say.
And I have it linked below too for them if they're watching this currently. It'll be down there for them, the show notes, along with the link to your website as well.
Yes, very good. Well, some of these I'll just be going through very quickly. I've shown them previously. But just briefly, my background, I earned a master's degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Michigan, then worked for 38 years in the nuclear industry. And for the last 11 years, I've been doing research and presentations on the Shroud of Turin. And my goal is to explain the mysteries of the Shroud and to promote future testing of the Shroud of Turin. So let's get into some of the questions here. So what I've done here, I've highlighted the questions using a yellow slide. I'm also using blue slides to separate the different sections that we're going to be discussing, as I did on my previous presentation. So let me just talk through, and I've, as I say, I've edited these for ease of reading and for consistency, but I've tried to maintain what the comment was. And so I've then assigned names to these individuals based upon how they signed in. So Ken said, as a believer, the Old and New Testaments are all I need. Everything else is just noise and BS. I'll respond to that on the next slide. Hillbilly says the Bible plainly shows us that this is a fake. His body was wrapped in strips of linen and there was a separate cloth covering his face. Whippo says, you know, and I've seen some of these names before on previous Shroud videos that I've made. So I think some of these individuals just kind of watch and then try and make their criticisms on the videos. So Whippo says, biblical details are completely missing in all such Shroud promoting videos. Well, that's not true. I mean, even this video has biblical details on it. I frequently do that. Shroud promoting videos because they clearly debunk this relic cult. No, they don't. Jesus was wrapped in linen cloths, bandages, strips with about 30 kilograms spices.
I hear that one a lot too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. I'll go into that. Explain how this could have been done with something like the Shroud. Well, that's easily done. I can explain that. Number 4, Arnold says the Shroud is a forgery. It's not Jesus because it contradicts Isaiah. We'll look at that. And number 5, Wretch, that's a good name. Wretch says, these Shroud studies are merely secular folly. The Bible explicitly debunks the Shroud of Turin as being the burial cloth of Jesus. Read the New Testament accounts and the burial resurrection. End of debate. Well, no, that doesn't end the debate at all. A little bit of background on myself, first of all. I became a Christian about 60 years ago. So I'm very familiar with the Bible and with these issues. I started teaching the Bible about 50 years ago. My last assignment was I taught a group, an adult group of adults at a church for about 15 years. I'm now teaching 2 small groups. One, we just finished Daniel. We're going into Isaiah at this point. And the other, we're talking about prophecy in the Bible. So just going through my library, you can see part of my library behind me. I have about 1,600 books in my library. Behind me and in front of me, I have 41 Bibles. I have 133 commentaries just in my multi-volume sets. I have 44 books on the Shroud. I have 353 scientific papers on the Shroud on my hard drive. So you see, these are serious issues. So when people say, well, I just think such and such, well, how much have you researched it? Have you done, 11 years of work on it? I know people that have spent 30 or 40 years studying the Shroud. Okay, and so on. So
it's not hard to rattle off, just a quick, 10-word YouTube comment. Well.
Yeah, that's true. So I believe that the Bible is the Word of God. It's entirely inspired and fully inerrant. That's my perspective. So I take the Bible seriously, and I take science seriously. And that is because God has spoken in 2 ways to mankind. And we'll get into that on the next slide. Okay, here. So we just went through some of my background. Now, I said that God has spoken in 2 ways to mankind. One is through his word, the scriptures. The other is through creation around us. Now, that's clearly made in Romans 1:20. That's the point that he's made. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So in other words, even if people have never seen the Bible, have never heard of Jesus, they still have creation around them, and God will hold them accountable to respond to God's reality based upon two things: his creation around them, and in their heart, they know that they've done wrong. Their
Hmm.
conscience of sinfulness that they're aware of. He expects people to respond to these things. Now, regarding this issue of um, some of the translations in the New Testament. For example, Isaiah 52:14, I think, is what the previous person was referring to. Now, in the New Catholic Bible, NCB, it says, just as many people recoiled at the sight of him, he was so disfigured that he no longer appeared to be human. Now, this concept of him no longer appearing to be human does occur in a few different translations, but most of them not. So,
Right.
for example, the King James says, as many were astonished at thee, referring to the people of Israel. Now, his visage was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. The more current translation, New American Standard Bible, which is what I normally use. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, again, assuming this is referring to Israel. So his appearance was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. So that this passage in the modern translations is better translated as referring to Jesus being more marred than other human beings. And this was probably because he was both scourged and crucified. They
Hmm.
may have never seen a person before that was both scourged and crucified. So that in that sense, he would be more marred than the sons of men. And then down in John 19:40, where it's referring to strips, John 19:40 is translated as strips of linen in the New King James, not in the Old King James. The New King James translates it
Right.
as strips, and so does the New International, both fairly popular versions. It's also in 9 other translations, but is translated as just generic linen or linen cloths or wrappings or sheets or pieces in
Hmm.
52 translations that are in the BibleGateway.com. Now,
Yes.
that's my best source of all the different English translations. So
Yeah.
85 of those translations don't refer to strips of linen. Only
So the
15% do.
vast majority, right? That
The
it's
vast
not listed as
majority
strips. Wow. Okay.
translate it in different ways. And
Yes.
that's because the word strip doesn't have a clear meaning. What is a
Right.
strip? Is it a quarter inch wide or 1 inch or 3 inches?
Yeah.
Could it be 8 inches? Could it be 12 inches wide? Just
Right.
so long as it's longer
Or
than
three
a
feet
foot.
wide and 14
Could
feet
it
long.
could it be 3.5 feet wide?
Right.
Because the Shroud of Turin is 14.5 feet long. That could still be called a strip
Yeah.
because
Sure.
strip is a very general word. I think the better word is simply pieces, which would be consistent with cloths or
Hmm.
wrappings or sheets or just a generic word, linen.
Sure.
Okay, so there's no contradiction here in reality
Well,
between
especially if
what
you consider the thesis that they would have, the main linen and then some sort of wrap around it, which may have been sewn back on. There's different theories about that, but yeah, this mummy kind of impression that a lot of people have just doesn't line up.
yes, unfortunately, some of the I remember years ago I was reading about this word and the Greek background to it, and they said that it must be translated as strips. I was trying to read the arguments why some people say it's strips, but they said because Lazarus was clearly wrapped in a long strip of linen because it said that he was tied. Well, see, that
Hmm.
doesn't make sense to me because the body cloth, that is the Shroud of Turin, that was wrapped over him, tied in narrower strips perpendicular to the body cloth. So that, you can't argue that Lazarus was tied in long strips of linen to mean that this word ought to be translated as strips. It doesn't make sense to me.
Hmm.
So the other thing that's sometimes said is that the Bible clearly says that Jesus was buried in the spices, and those spices were translate anywhere from about 80 pounds to 90 to 100 pounds of spices. But the fact is, it doesn't claim what fraction of those spices were put onto his body. It could have been just the spices that were put onto his hair, for example, liquid spices, because there are 2 verses in the Bible that said that when the women left the burial site, they went and prepared the spices. Well, what spices? The only context is the spices that Nicodemus. So that the spices that were put onto his body were probably just a very small fraction of the total. And that's consistent with the fact that it's not clear whether the Shroud of Turin had spices detected or not. I believe it was 2 reachers said that they did detect them. 2 reachers said that they didn't.
Hmm.
So it's unclear. Okay.
Right.
So that this claim that the 100 pounds or 75 pounds of spices put onto his body not being detected on the shroud proves that the Shroud of Turin wasn't the burial cloth. It has no basis really in logical reasoning.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's go into a brief summary of the background
Yes,
and the
please.
history. Yes, now of course the Shroud of Turin is 3.5 feet wide, about 14.5 feet long, and the top image shows how you would see it with the unaided eye. The bottom figure shows how you would see it as the camera view with the contrast enhanced. So you can actually see it better in the camera's negative view, which is actually a positive view. What's on the
Right.
shroud is actually a negative view. So what you see here is it's a head-to-head image. You see the front image is to the left, the back image is to the right, but it's a head-to-head image because that's how he would have been buried. It indicates how he was buried. So they brought his body and laid it down on the cloth on half of the length of the cloth that was underneath his body. Then they would have taken the face cloth off his body, laid it aside, and then wrapped the top cloth over the top, pulling it down to cover his feet. So that when we look at the front image and the back image, the main point that you're going to get from these 2 images is that this individual was crucified exactly as described, as Jesus was crucified, as described in the Bible, in the Gospels of the New
Right.
Testament. So, and that has to be explained. How do you get these 2 images to be exact duplicates of what you expect based upon the Bible? In other words, the Bible is confirming that making a confirmation that this is authentic, and so the Shroud researchers. This is the general view. I know there's some people think differently, but this is the general view of Shroud researchers that the Shroud was carried out of Jerusalem before Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D. Then went up to Antioch, probably, from where it was taken to do various things in various locations, then up to Constantinople, and then either by water or by land, we're not sure the route, ended up in Lorraine, France, which then I have a solid line down to Turin, because that's a continuous history starting in Lorraine, France, down to Turin, Italy. And so that when people are saying that there's no evidence prior to the 14th century, that's what they're meaning. There's no continuous history. Well, that's true, but there are points of time with good evidence. I think they're good evidence that the shroud was well known and highly revered prior to it coming into Lorraine, France. So it came into Turin, Italy in 1578. This is the cathedral in which it's in. Last November, when my wife and I went to Turin to speak on the Shroud of Turin, we saw the box up in the front left corner of this cathedral. We saw it in the box, so we didn't see the shroud itself, but we saw where it was located in the box in which it was housed. This picture was taken in 1978, and it shows some of the 2.5 to 3 million people that visited the shroud in 1978. So let's go into the history of the Shroud of Turin, and here's the negative. Brad says, there is no provenance. Now, that means there's no evidence tracing it back to be the authentic burial cloth of Jesus.
In other words, no chain of custody being the claim, right?
No chain of custody.
Yeah.
And that's consistent with what I
Mm-hmm.
said. The continuous history is only since Lorraine, France, but there's good points of evidence prior.
And no
Craig
chain
said,
of custody doesn't mean it's impossible. Like, so some people jump
no,
to that. We don't have a chain of custody, therefore it couldn't be the shroud. It's like, well, no, you can't prove through a chain of custody that it is, but there might be
oh
other
yeah,
evidence. Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I exist. I'm here in
Right.
front of you. But does anyone have a chain of custody
Right.
back to
Yeah.
my birth? Well, I would say no.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, so then Craig says there's no mention of the shroud prior to the 14th century. Well, we'll take that up.
I was gonna
Matt,
say too, Bob. I couldn't find the title to my car a couple months ago. Like I bought it. It's like I just So yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
yes, yeah. I mean, can I prove that my mother existed? Well, I believe she did, but it'd be an effort to prove that she existed based upon historical
Mm-hmm.
documentation.
Yeah. And it gets harder. Yeah. Right.
So Matt says, is there proof that the image was there on the cloth before the cloth was in a fire in 1532? In other words,
Right.
was the image formed by the fire? And I
I
say,
see.
yes, there is proof that it wasn't formed by the fire. There's Galatians 3:1. We'll talk about that a little bit, where I think that we do have a reference in the Bible to the burial cloth of Jesus. There's also
Oh
paintings,
yeah.
coins, the pre-manuscript, the diary of Robert de Clary, etc. So we'll go into that now. So we should recognize one of the problem in proving the provenance of the burial cloth of Jesus is the frequent name changes that the shroud has gone under. It was called the tetradiplon, which means folded in four, referring to how the shroud was folded at that time. There's another word. I don't like to even attempt to pronounce this word, but the meaning is not made by human hands.
Oh
That's a
yes. Yeah.
recognition that it's not human made. There's the image of God incarnate. Well, that's a good theological name that this is referring to the deity of Christ, that God was fully God. Uh, the image of Edessa, it could be one and the same as the Mendelian.
Mm-hmm.
There's the shroud or image of Lorraine, France, because it was there. It would take on the name of its location, in other words.
Right.
Or the Shroud of Chambéry, France, where it was in the fire, or the Shroud of Turin, or Holy Shroud. So it came to be called the Shroud of Turin or Holy Shroud in 1978 when it went into Turin. So you can't
Right.
trace it back based upon the
For
name, the
15,
Shroud of Turin.
1578. Is that was it 1578? I think that it.
Yeah, what did
Yeah.
I forget what I said. Yes,
I think 19, but yeah,
1578.
yeah, right, right. So, but that's a more recent thing you're saying. It's just in the past few centuries, really, that it's universally referred to as the Shroud of Turin.
Yes, so this
Right.
display that they had it on display in this cathedral in 1978, which is the 400th anniversary
I
of
see.
it
Yes.
coming into Italy. Okay, so it was the image predates the fire in 1532. That's the
Okay.
point. Okay, so then we have the names Tetradiplon, Archaeopteryx, the image of God incarnate, image of Edessa, Mendelian, image of Lorraine, a shroud of Chambéry, shroud of Turin, etc. So then let's go into Galatians 3:1. And let's just look at this. It says,
Yeah.
"Oh, foolish Galatians!" Paul's writing to them. They were Christian believers. Now they're departing, going back to the Jewish synagogue under persecution. "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified." So, in other words, they saw it with their very own eyes. And what was it they saw? Jesus Christ that was clearly portrayed. Now, the verb there is prographo. You see, in that word,
Mm-hmm.
the word grapho sounds like graphic, doesn't it? Yeah, they're
Yeah.
related. So it can be translated portrayed, displayed, placarded or signboarded.
I'm
Now,
getting
when you
my
drive around
interlinear Bible here. I wanted to take a look at it. Yeah.
yeah, so when you drive around the neighborhood and you see a realtor signs up, that's a signboard.
Hmm.
It's a sign with a message on it. That's a signboard.
Sure.
It's some type of graphic that is publicly portrayed to communicate a message. Now, the message that was being communicated was that Jesus Christ was a real person and he died by crucifixion as shown to you on his burial cloth. And so Paul was extremely, very much upset and just misunderstanding how in the world could they depart from this being true after this has been shown to them.
Hmm.
So I think we do have a reference. If Galatians 3:1 is not referring to the burial cloth of Jesus, then I have no idea what he's referring to here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Shroud of Turin first photograph was taken by Secondo Pia. Uh, he was a lawyer in Italy. His hobby was photography in the early days of photography. The camera that he took the first pictures of is shown here, and this is in the museum in Turin, Italy. When he developed the large glass plate out of his camera, he thought it would display a fuzzy negative image because what's shown on the shroud is a fuzzy image. And taking a picture of one thing with his camera, he would always end up with a negative. But instead, he ended up with a good resolution, positive image, which meant that the original, that is the burial cloth, the Shroud of Turin that he was taking a picture of, is not a painting because artists cannot paint what they've never seen. And they had never seen a negative of a person at that point. This is prior to the time of camera.
Photographic negative. Right.
Yeah, they
We
never
sort of
seen
take it
one.
for granted.
So that's the
Right.
meaning of it. So they accused him of cheating, of deception. And as an attorney, he lost all his reputation until 1931. So that would be 33 years until 1931, 34 years uh, until Giuseppe Enri took the next photograph and confirmed the results of Giuseppe. Uh, I get the names mixed up.
Secondo Pio. Yeah.
Secondo Pia, thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
Yeah, so in other words, what was the Shroud of Turin was the burial cloth of Jesus. And due to persecution, the early Christians were under intense persecution with martyrdoms during the 82% of their time between the time of Jesus and the early conferences. 82% of the time, the Christians were being killed. And so their valuables were often hidden. And so the keeper of the valuables that was a term for one of the people there in the church in Antioch, evidently hid the burial cloth in a little niche above a gate in a wall, and then he was killed under persecution because he wouldn't reveal where it was, according to ancient tradition. And then it stayed hidden because he was the only one that knew it. No one else knew it. It stayed hidden until the early 500s, evidently, when the wall was being rebuilt, probably in Antioch, due to 2 earthquakes and a fire in the city. They were rebuilding the walls. And so then they rediscovered it in the early 500s, which is why then, after that, they were able to paint pictures accurately displaying what Jesus looked like. Prior to finding that image in the niche above the gate, Jesus was pictured without hair, without mustache, without beard, because the emperor was always pictured that way.
Right.
But once they discovered that burial cloth of Jesus, then they know what he looked like. So you notice on this, hair parted in the middle, hair a little longer on one side than the other, long nose, large eyes, mustache, beard, looking straight at you. And so when we go to this painting, hair parted in the middle, hair a little longer on one side than the other, long nose, large eyes, mustache, beard, looking straight at you. This painting then, and the Shroud of Turin, then gave rise to the entire history of Byzantine iconography, that
Right.
is paintings and drawings in the Byzantine Empire of Jesus. So that this history of what Jesus looked like then came down to us,
And
so
Bob,
that
can we go
our
back just for one
concept,
sec, if I may? Sorry, back to that last slide, because I just like
yes,
to point out to people when we talk about this, this comes up. If it's just a one-off, like the Pantocrator top left there from the Catherine, the monastery of Saint Catherine.
yes,
If it's just that, it's one thing. Like a detail, like the hair longer on one side than the other. But why is it like that in every single other one of these? And it's just, to me, it's
yes,
just it's a logical, like the most logical explanation for that reality. The reality is not in question. The most logical explanation I've ever heard for that is that these are all based on a source image. All right.
yeah, yes.
So yeah,
The best explanation, and
simplest
often the
explanation
simplest.
too. Right.
That's the
Exactly.
simplest
Yep.
for why this arose in all of the paintings of Byzantine iconography, as well as in coins in the
Mm-hmm.
Byzantine Empire. And we'll get to that. So the point here is that this history started with the image of Jesus that was discovered on his burial cloth, and then the first painting down through Byzantine iconography to our understanding of what Jesus looked like. Hair parted in the middle, longer on one side than the other, long nose, large eyes, mustache, beard, looking straight at you.
Yeah.
You don't have to go into 500 different similarities. This is easy for a casual observer to notice,
Right.
and it should be. And it's just that's what in our culture, that's what he's thought to look like. So that his image, then starting on coins in the Byzantine Empire, this was 692 to 695, and this is a gold Salatus when the Byzantine Empire was very wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we have the image of Jesus, again, all these same qualities, and you have the cross behind him indicating who it is again. And
Right.
the emperor may have his image on the back or not. I don't know on this one, but on the one that I have, which is when they were much poorer, this is from 1025 to 1028. We have the image on the front. This is a bronze coin. You see here the nimbus or halo around him indicates who it is based upon
Mm-hmm.
the details of that. But on the back, the emperor took his image off at this point and indicated exactly who this is. It's Jesus Christ, King of Kings, in capital Greek. So that
Right.
is highly significant. When the emperor of the entire Byzantine Empire takes his image off the coins, he would rather see his image being handled by everyone and seen every day in his empire. But no, the one he wants to be seen is Jesus Christ's image, because he's Jesus Christ, the King of Kings.
Yes.
So they had high reverence for him, and they were very much aware of this.
Hmm.
The next item for consideration is a Hungarian PreCeX. Now, codex, instead of a scroll, it's in a book form with a binding on one end. So it was originally called a codex.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the PreCeX because the man who discovered it, his last name was Pre. And it's a document with many pages. This is just one page we're looking at, but there's several pages in this large codex that has colored line drawings, and this is one of them. But it's written in Hungarian. It's the oldest manuscript in the Hungarian language, and it's located in the National Library in Budapest. It dates to 1192 to 1195 by the experts that date these things. And you notice, let me see if we can get a clearer picture here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me back up one.
Yeah.
It was common motif was to have two pictures in that era, upper picture and a lower picture.
I
So
see.
what we have here, here's the upper picture. You can tell again by the nimbus that this individual is Jesus. The prominence of this nimbus compared to the other two probably means that this is the Apostle John with Nicodemus, rather Joseph of Arimathea, and maybe Nicodemus here. What we
Sure.
see here is a man that's imaged after the image on the Shroud of Turin with his hands crossed, and with his thumbs missing, just like on the Shroud of Turin.
Yes.
And this cloth is long. It goes back and it wraps around the younger man, probably Joseph of Arimathea. I'm not sure which would be which there, but you can tell what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then in the bottom image, what we see is the burial cloth with the top of the cloth folded back, and that's what you see here, to reveal red crosses underneath, symbolizing the blood from Jesus.
Right.
Now, yeah, it's kind of reddish orange, but was probably meant to be red, maybe faded over the years.
Mm-hmm.
But then, so that's one indication that this is a burial cloth. Another indication is this pattern, this stair-step pattern in this area and over here that is characteristic of the Shroud of Turin. I'll show you that in a second. But the primary evidence is these 1, 2, 3, 4 holes in an L-shaped pattern. Where does that come from? Where does that pattern come from? Shroud of Turin. The last evidence here is the fact that between this stair-step pattern and the pattern over here, we have this top section of the burial cloth in disarray. And what we see here is a knife that's cut something from the burial cloth. You look up here, who are these women? This is evidently Mary because of the prominence of her nimbus. What you see on her arm here is the side view of a face with a long beard on it. And so what he's cut from the cloth is the face of Jesus. So this cloth is the burial cloth of Jesus that's being pictured. The blood inside the cloth, the stair-step pattern, the 4 holes in the L-shaped pattern, and the face being cut from the cloth all indicate that this is the burial cloth of Jesus. It's dated to 1192 to 1195. That contradicts the carbon dating.
Right.
That would be 4 standard deviations away from the carbon dating. Those who did the carbon dating would say that can't be. In other words, there's something wrong.
And just to clarify about this, the PreCeX, there's no serious dispute whatsoever about its age, correct?
Not that I've heard, no.
Yeah, that's what I've seen too. It seems pretty unanimously attributed to that time, which is at least 150 or so, or 200 years older than the Shroud date. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see what we're building here. Not only do the paintings contradict the date from the Shroud of Turin, the coins do. So does the PreCeX.
Yeah.
So that here's this stair-step pattern on the 3-to-1 herringbone weave.
Yeah.
That the shroud is made out of. And you can
never saw it depicted that way before. That's interesting. Yes.
Well, I had to put in these lines. I dropped each of these lines in order to show the pattern.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a close-up of those 3 holes on the shroud. Here's a picture of the knife. This little curve here. I have 2 knives that have this type of curve on it. So this is a common type of a curve. In other words, they put this curve on it if they don't want to risk the chance of running the knife off the object that they're cutting. Okay, this could be done for a person, for example, in a factory that's dealing with constructing fabric, where they go to cut the fabric and don't want the knife to run off the fabric.
Okay.
So on the full image, these are the locations. The arrows point to the 4 locations of this 4-hole pattern. They appear on a copy of the shroud that was made in 1516, and painted copies of the shroud, yes, have been made. And from that and they don't have any appearance. You can always tell the painted copy from the original. Vast difference. So that these holes predate the fire in 1532. Now, if you bring those 4 locations together, this is what it looks like. And so you can see here, the upper left, what was the top section of the cloth when it was folded. So evidently someone probably carrying a censer filled with hot coals leaned over a little bit too far to see the cloth, and the hot coals dropped from a censer onto the cloth, burning through one layer after the other. So
That'll
the
do it.
upper left was the top layer, upper right was the next layer, lower right was the next layer, and the bottom left was the bottom layer. So
Right.
those 4 holes are from the Shroud of Turin, which then was copied into the Pre manuscript.
I
Now,
see. Huh.
these are good points of evidence that the shroud goes way back.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So again, that's what we see here. And most people do not know that Mary was holding an image of his face here. They haven't seen that. Most people, who have even looked at the Pre manuscript,
I never
and
noticed that before. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, most people do not recognize that this is a knife that's
Hmm.
cut that face out of the cloth.
Wow.
Okay, very interesting. So I think that's what I've added to this because to me it's obviously true. Open your eyes and look at it.
Wow.
Okay. Now there's also the diary of Robert de Clary, who was in the Fourth Crusade and was in Constantinople in 1203. So in his diary he wrote, "There was another of the churches which they call My Lady Saint Mary of Blackernay." Blackernay was a district in Constantinople,
Mm-hmm.
where there was the shroud in which our Lord had been wrapped, very clear here, which every Friday raised itself upright so one could see the figure of our Lord on it. So what's going on? What's he talking about? Well, the people, especially the leaders, the intelligentsia in Constantinople, were very big about having little mechanisms, little gizmos to do special things. And so what they probably had here, what was that they had a box with a means using pulleys to raise a section of the burial cloth
Yeah.
at just the front section of the burial cloth. They probably put that up on a raised platform at the front of the church. And then every Friday then, there was a man went underneath this box and using the pulleys then raise the image. So, every Friday. So they would have seen it 52 times a year. They'd be very familiar with it, consistent with it being on their money. So they were very well aware of this, highly respected for the emperor to take his image off the coins. So just amazing. Now,
Wow.
you get some simplistic opposition. Samantha, regarding ancient fabrics, Samantha said,
Mm-hmm.
could the shroud of Christ really have been preserved after all these years? And then Dynamic said, it's a fake. There's no way a linen cloth would have survived all these centuries. Now, you notice he doesn't give any evidence. There's no logical reasoning or evidence for that statement.
Right. It's just
He
kind of
just makes a
declarative.
claim. Any garment would have rotted away in a very short time due to body liquids and insects. Well, would the burial
Well,
cloth of Jesus
maybe.
have been affected?
But
Yeah,
like, let's.
would it have been affected by body liquids? Did his body rot? No, Jesus' body didn't rot according to the biblical text,
Mm-hmm.
according to both prophecies in the Old Testament and Jesus' own prophecies of his own resurrection in the New Testament. Empty tomb and the post-resurrection appearances. So that, yeah, the cloth would not have affected by decay of his body. What about insects? Well, a cloth doesn't have to be affected by insects. I mean, if a cloth is buried, maybe it could be, yes. But you don't, if you have a prized object, piece of cloth, it doesn't have to be affected by insects, it can easily be protected. So Samantha says, could the Shroud of Turin really have been preserved after all these years? Let me show you. Let's see if we can get this. This is a shirt that my
Let me
mother made
blow it
for
up full
me.
screen. There we go.
Yeah, this is a shirt. I call this my Paisley shirt,
Yes.
front and back. Isn't that interesting? This is the
I got a
cloth that
tie
I
like that.
chose in high school. This shirt was made 60 years ago, and it looks just as good today as it looked then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's 60 years of decay of cotton.
Mm-hmm.
So how would this? How if you're protecting it from insects, from high temperature, especially fire, from
Mm-hmm.
humidity and moisture, what mechanisms are for fabric to decay. There's two mechanisms. One is oxidation, absorbing oxygen out of the atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is dehumidification. That is water being lost from the
Right.
cloth. So those two mechanisms operate very as as good as the day that it was made 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I have two cloth shirts that are made out of linen, and these were
Okay.
given to me by a visiting student from, uh, not, I'm sorry, my mind goes blank on that. Anyway, these are
Oh, no
two
worries.
linen shirts. So, and this was given to me probably 15 years ago. So
Mm-hmm.
again, no effect. No
Mm-hmm.
effect. So yes, matter of fact, in the museum in Turin, Italy, in another museum, you remember the shroud is located in Turin, Italy, in the cathedral, in a specially kept container. In another museum, they have a linen garment, and it has been affected much more than what I showed you here, but it has been affected. But it's twice as old as the Shroud of Turin. It's 4,000 years old, and it's
Mm-hmm.
linen. You can
Yeah.
still tell what it is, but yes, it
Yeah.
has decayed more
And
more
we've
so
we've
than the
found linen fabrics, even from like Masada and other places that have been subjected to far more, you know,
yes.
potentially far more environmental, impact and that sort of thing. So it's not not certainly not an automatic just assumption, right? Oh, it's old. It must have deteriorated.
Yeah. So that
Maybe not.
people who make these statements, they need to stop and think that people who've been studying the Shroud of Turin for decades would know this. They're not idiots. I hope I'm not an idiot. I have some intelligence left. I would know this after
Hmm.
studying it for over a decade. Okay. So let's go into image formation now. I don't have time to go back and show you all the slides and go
Oh,
through all
sure. And
the
that's
arguments that we went
I've
through
got the
previously.
link below too to that if they want to go for the deeper dive into that previous
Yes,
argument in
see,
the
so
video.
please go back to the other one. This is just the
Yeah.
conclusion. So
Hmm.
this is my hypothesis for image formation. Now, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a proposed concept for how I believe that the image could have been, might have been, may have been, uh, potentially, probably form the image. I'm not making a claim that this is definitely how it was formed. The way science works is that a hypothesis is formulated that attempts to be consistent with all the evidence that we have, and then makes predictions based upon that hypothesis, so that in the testing of the predictions, you then influence scientists who gradually come to the conclusion that yes, this hypothesis must be true. So this hypothesis has not gone through that testing process. So we need additional testing on the Shroud of Turin. So I call this the VCRB hypothesis. Vertically collimated radiation burst hypothesis is what the acronym stands for. Vertically collimated means that the radiation was being emitted vertically up and vertically down,
Hmm.
alternating. So this hypothesis, and let me just read it. It's an extremely brief, intense burst of vertically collimated radiation was emitted in the body. And this is derived just based upon the evidence of the images on the shroud. Was emitted in the body that rapidly oscillated between vertically up and vertically down directions. This consisted of charged particles, probably protons, because there's so many protons in the body,
Hmm.
uh, that caused an oscillating corona discharge. Uh, Discharge would be like a little spark, static electricity,
Sure.
that caused an oscillating corona discharge from the top fibers facing the body, that caused a high frequency alternating current in the fibers, that deposited heat in the thin outer layer of the fibers, that discolored them around the zero point 0.2 micrometer thick circumference of the fibers to form the images. long series of logic. But this is the sequence that I had to go back and answering the question at each point. What could have caused that? What could have caused that? What could have caused that? So I reasoned back the sequence of physical, scientifically known principles that could explain these different features on the Shroud of Turin. And I started with 27 different evidences from the Shroud of Turin to do that. So this is a conclusion. But then we have people that come with questions. Now, this is interesting. That I always like it
Yeah,
when
I saw
someone
this is a very specific one. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a good one because he says, I hold a PhD and master's degree in physics. I have 4 questions. Since when is linen an electrical conductor? Well, it would not be labeled to be an electrical conductor today, but what I'm claiming is that most items, probably including linen, fabric, can conduct electricity under extreme circumstances. And that's a test that I've proposed. Okay, if that test fails, if there's absolutely no way that a linen fiber could conduct electrical conductivity under extreme voltage and extremely high frequencies, then this hypothesis would be disproven. Okay, that's the way science works. Next question.
But Bob, if I
referring,
may, just for a sec, but you're making the point there, though, that might be overlooked. If we're looking at it from just a kind of a standard sort of scientific approach, you're making the claim here that, as I understand it, you have to be considering these sort of bizarre circumstances, right? Or at least that if we're talking about something to the magnitude that we are theoretically talking about here, you might be dealing with these sort of, unusual, is that a good word to use? Maybe these unusual or untypical, conditions. So yeah,
so
point that out.
so the voltage or current, I'm not sure which it would be really. It probably more so the current has to be high enough in order to scorch this very thin outer layer on the fibers. So it has to be able, yet it can't be too high of voltage and current because it didn't blacken it. It just scorched it. Okay, it has to be within a certain range. Then the frequency of that alternating current has to be extremely high because an alternating current will force the electrons to the outer radius of the conductor automatically because of the oscillating electric and magnetic fields that the alternating current is causing. Okay. Interesting. And so this extremely thin outer layer on the fibers that are discolored has to be explained. If a hypothesis doesn't explain this feature, it cannot be correct. But this hypothesis does explain it. Okay, so it can be correct. Doesn't prove that it is, but it can be.
It's a possibility, yes.
It's a possibility. Yeah. So then he, referring to myself, argues that what we are seeing is the effect of absorption, well, also scattering as well, absorption of air between the proton neutron. Notice he hyphens that, puts a hyphen there. Source, that is a clue as to where his mistake is. A proton neutron source and the cloth. When I crunch the numbers, the scattering absorption of air being about 2 barns, I couldn't confirm that number. And the number density of atoms is well known. Well, that's true. The mean free path of a low energy. Now, low energy would be thermal energy of a neutron, for example, is 0.025 electron volts. That's when it's in thermal equilibrium with the surroundings at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Low energy neutrons, notice what he's saying there? Through air, let me go back. Through air is around 50 meters. This means that the air gap of around 5 centimeters will absorb only 0.1% of the radiation. Now, here's my response. Protons form the images, but your calculation assumes neutrons form the images. It's simply wrong. It's very interesting that very highly educated, very highly intelligent people can make very simple mistakes. Okay, and that's why
we're all human.
We're all human, and that's why we have to confer with other people to get feedback from them. So the concept here that I'm proposing is that protons form the images, not neutrons. I'm very clear on that,
Okay.
because neutrons are highly penetrating. So if they form the image on the shroud, they would form just as strong an image on the outside of the wrapped configuration as on the inside of
As
the
on the
wrapped
inside of it.
configuration. You see?
I see.
So we know neutrons
Rather than
didn't
that
do it.
superficial
Yes.
image on just the one side. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it had to be protons from a charged particles, because that's what would have caused an alternating current in the fibers. Charged
Okay.
particles. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
That's interesting.
Number
Okay.
3, the type of radiation he proposes, neutrons, would not produce enough contrast for us to distinguish between the strong discoloration differences on the shroud. The air is not nearly absorbent enough for protons/neutrons to encode the air gap thickness information onto the images. Well, again, he's making the assumption that the neutrons form the image. And the problem here is that the data for the protons, I don't have available to me when I look on the internet. I don't have information on proton energies below 1,000 electron volts. That'd be 1 keV. The energy doesn't go down as far as what he's even considering here. So he cannot be considering the effect of protons in this issue. Okay, only neutrons. And so his whole approach is wrong. I'm sorry. I hope he contacts me and we can discuss it further. I'd like to get him excited about the Shroud of Turin until he pursues it further.
Yeah.
Okay, so in my looking at the proton energy, and you have to go to what's called the NIST data, and I'm not sure what NIST stands for, but it's the government data, and they've probably spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on obtaining this data. And so the result here,
Is it National Institute of Standards and Technology?
I bet
Possibly?
so.
Is that
Something
okay?
like that.
Yeah.
Something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
Very
I've
governmenty.
used the
Yeah.
data before, but I've never searched out what NIST stands for. But there it is. So that what I find here is that even at 1 keV, 1,000 electron volts, the average path length of the proteins would only be 0.00245 centimeters.
Wow.
Wow. I mean, it wouldn't even get across the air to get to the cloth. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to get up into the 1 MeV, million electron volts, for the average path of a proton to go 2.3 centimeters, or
Wow.
a 1.25 MeV proton would go about 3.3, or 1.5 MeV would go about 4.4 centimeters. Well, what do we need here? Well, on the Shroud of Turin, previous investigations by John Jackson have claimed that it's somewhere in the range of 3.5 to 4 to 4.5, somewhere in that range is what's needed. So the energy level would probably have to be somewhere in the range of a little over 1.25 MeV for the protons. If I'm understanding the tables that are listed in NIST correctly. Okay, so I'll put a little caveat on that. That's for further checking. Okay, so how are we doing on time?
We're looking good. I think we're moving along here. We could probably go another 10 minutes or so. Is that, think we can?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we have 4 more slides, I believe. So Gibbons on the image formation says, intuitively, I arrived at the same cause of the shroud's image 15 years ago. Well, I'd like to have more details on that. Well, I'd like to congratulate him and say that he's a very perceptive person. You know, I've heard of people saying that we cannot believe the carbon dating until we know what caused the images. And that's a perceptive statement. That's very true. And so the hypothesis that I've come up with, it explains both the image formation and the carbon dating, because the two are connected. In the radiation burst, there are protons and neutrons. The protons cause the image, and the neutrons shift the carbon date. So they're one and the same event. Explains both. That's why a lot of people
with two kind of correlated effects that we've seen basically play into the history of the shroud in such a big way. It's
Yes,
fascinating that they both come together here in this way. Yeah.
yes. And so protons forming the image is not a new concept invented by me. This goes way back. There's been a dedicated, probably not majority, but minority of individuals that have always thought that it was caused by some kind of charged particle.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or possibly electromagnetic radiation, a light, an ultraviolet light would be another
Right. Right.
alternative. I've been in communication recently with Paulo de Lazaro, the main proponent,
I was just going to
uh,
ask about that. He's the main proponent for the
ultraviolet light
ultraviolet,
hypothesis.
right?
Yes,
Right. Right.
yes,
Right.
and I would say I think that's the next best
Mm-hmm.
option. I think between his and my, I think these are the two best hypotheses
Okay.
for image formation. Um, now, Bernas says, can you calculate whether the splitting of the deuterium? So I'm postulating that deuterium. Now, deuterium
Mm-hmm.
is heavy hydrogen,
Okay.
so it's twice as heavy as normal hydrogen because it not only includes a proton but also a neutron. So when
I see.
deuterium splits, it would release one proton and one neutron for
Right.
each split that you have. So can you calculate whether splitting the deuterium would release the number of protons needed to produce the images consistent with the number of neutrons needed to shift the carbon dating from 33 AD to the range of 1260 to 1390? Very perceptive question, by the way. So my previous nuclear calculations that I did in 2014, I'm trying to restart those now, but in
Mm-hmm.
2014, I proved that the number of neutrons that would have to be emitted by the body would be 2 times 10 to the 18th. That is 2 followed by 18 zeros.
Wow.
Now, in calculating the number of neutrons in the body, I calculated 2 times 10 to the 28th, 2 followed by 28 zeros. In other words, the number of neutrons sounds like a very large number, but it's actually a very small number in compared to the number of neutrons in the body. Only one
Yeah.
neutron per 10 billion that are in the body are needed to shift the carbon date at the sample location at the corner of the shroud from 33 AD up to the range of 1260 to 1390. So that under that scenario, that would be the same number of protons would be emitted from the body. The question is, the problem is that neutrons are neutral. They have no charge, so that they are highly penetrating. Whereas protons, each proton has a positive charge, so it interacts with the cloud of electrons surrounding the nucleus in each atom. So they have a much shorter penetration distance, much shorter. So
Okay.
the problem that we have right now is we don't know if these protons are homogeneously, uniformly emitted from within the body. What fraction gets? We don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the energy level. And that's why I'm restarting my nuclear calculations to try and have that information available before the big Shroud conference coming up this year
Right.
in St. Louis.
Right.
Go to the website.
Yeah.
So the answer is I can't do that to Bernas. I can't do that calculation now. I will have to wait until after I've done my nuclear calculations to find out how many protons are escaping the body. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So Hood says, my big question is why the oscillation would be perfectly vertical. Let me talk about this a little bit. Why is the proton oscillation exactly vertically opposite to the direction of gravity and exactly in the direction of gravity? Well, the problem is that we really don't understand gravity. So there are 4 forces in nature: strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravity. That's all that there are. You touch something, and what force are you feeling? You're feeling the electromagnetic force in the atoms of your finger repelling the electromagnetic force of the atoms in the table.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Uh, and then in our standard model of subatomic particles, I think there's something like 42 particles now. So that 40 or 50 years ago, there was a new effort to come up with a theory of everything.
Right.
Okay, that is a physics hypothesis and theory that explains all four forces and all what are now 42 subatomic particles in our standard model. And so over those years, multiple theories have been developed, and they call those theories string theories. Of course, not referring to strings as we would know them, but referring to extremely short lengths of pure energy that can either be straight or looped, but in various vibration modes. Okay, so it's string theories. And the very string theories say that yes, we can explain 3 out of the 4 forces. We can't explain gravity. That's why I say we don't understand gravity. We can explain the 3 forces of nature and the 42 particles, but you have to assume there to be anywhere from 10 to 26 dimensions in reality. Now, our 5 senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, can only perceive 4 dimensions. But there needs to be at least 10 dimensions to explain the 42 particles in our standard theory. So that would mean that in these 6 extra dimensions that evidently probably are real, there's plenty of room for God and angels' existence, and plenty of room for Satan and demons' existence. There's plenty of room in reality for those things, though we don't perceive them. Okay?
Right.
So therefore,
our
for
range
example,
of perception is extremely limited anyway.
yeah.
So it's just probably
So that when you start thinking about the resurrection of Jesus, what is the resurrection? The resurrection of Jesus is essentially the disappearance of the atoms in his body from our perception of reality, from within his burial cloth. Because John, when he went into the tomb, he said, "I saw and believed." Well, the next verse tells us that he was the first to believe in the resurrection. Well, he didn't believe in it because he saw the limestone walls, ceilings, and floor, or because he saw Peter. No, those weren't new. What was new was the collapsed burial cloth, possibly with the tie strips on, so that it would have been clear to him that his body had disappeared, and so that Jesus' prophecies of his resurrection were not to be taken figuratively or allegorically, but literally. So John was the
bodily
first
resurrection.
John was the first person, upon seeing the collapsed burial cloth, to reinterpret Jesus' prophecies from figurative to literal, and thus believed in the resurrection. Very significant.
Yeah.
Okay, isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Boy, oh boy.
It's so essential too. Yeah, because it's not just strictly a spiritual claim. It's the claim right in the creed, right, or the resurrection of the body. Christ in this mysterious way being able to, transit in ways that we can't even imagine in the resurrection accounts, but also being able to do things like eat fish or having, like if he wills it for you to be able to somehow physically touch, his wounds, these sorts of things. So it's a tremendous mystery, but you can't just say it's spiritual and leave out the importance of the bodily reality. Yeah.
Yeah, the body refers to that as a switch from physical body to spiritual body.
Spiritual body, right? Yeah, Paul.
So the
right.
physical, this is how I understand that. The physical body was under the restrictions of the laws of physics. Okay, whereas the spiritual body is not under those laws, but under the laws of the spirit. So that, like you said, he could, by an act of his will, he could pop into a room with the doors and windows closed and locked. Or he could pop out of the building by making a transition between alternate dimensions. That's my paper number 2 out of the 39 that I've written on my website.
Yes. Yeah.
Paper number 1 goes into the details of resurrection. So we have 2 more slides on, well, 1 more on image formation, and then 2 on conclusions, what people have said. They have said very positive things too.
Yes.
Well spoken, with a beautiful logical hypothesis. Best news I've heard in a very long time. I think he's on the right track. This was a grand use of scientific method to prove God did it. We are brighter for this illuminating explanation. Incredible video, deserves way more views. Only recently became a believer in Jesus Christ. This
Hey,
is
share it with your
astounding
friends.
evidence. This is astounding evidence. I've been watching several videos on the Shroud lately from non-theologians who are experts in their field, and I'm becoming more and more convinced every day that the Shroud is genuine. Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
Ned, this is an outstanding
Same.
presentation. Yeah, the fact that the image is limited to the uppermost 0.2 micrometers of the fiber, it should be, is overwhelming evidence for non-natural explanations. Very true. I don't see how a medieval artist or forgery could have accomplished this highly targeted discoloration. But even more challenging for skeptics is that the discoloration is on the entire circumference of the image fibers in that extremely thin layer, shorter than a wavelength of light.
Wow.
How could you couldn't do it when you couldn't even see it?
Right. Right.
So maybe
Yeah.
we should stop there.
So, yeah, I think, well, and I'm sure it's funny. This might be a regular thing because I have no doubt that this video is gonna generate at least as much interest and an ongoing conversation as the ones before. And anything you got at the time of this recording, Bob, just in closing, anything you got coming up? You mentioned the conference. So we're recording this now in January 2025. So we don't know when necessarily you might be watching this, but what's that conference looking like for you?
Oh, it's going to be wonderful. We haven't had a conference since 2019. We've had them every 2 or 3 years, but COVID shut us down for a while.
Yeah.
But we have a team of people putting this together. It's been put together at a beautiful location in St. Louis, the 2014 conference, it was in St. Louis, and so this is going to be a marvelous thing. The speakers from all over the world. All the main Shroud speakers will be there, and researchers.
Wonderful.
There's going to be 2 modes. One is for the new person without a deep understanding of the Shroud, so they'll be able to go through that. This is and another track. This is going to be for the more the specialists. But then a person could come, go to the one tract, and then make a progress over to the specialist tract as well, so as to get
Wonderful.
both. And so we're looking for it. Everyone, the Shroud people are very excited about this. The website is the Shroud 2025 conference dot I think it's com.
Mm-hmm.
So go there and look at it. And
you know what? I don't think I realized till just I was looking at the website. I didn't realize it's at the Augustine Institute's new digs out there.
Yes,
Which is
285 acres,
isn't it like
285 acres,
I
beautiful
think it's the
facility.
old Boeing, like retreat center or something like that. It's gorgeous. So absolutely, I'll have that linked below as well.
Yes.
So, well, Bob Rucker, thank you so much as always for coming on. We'll definitely have you back probably before too long, I'm sure as well. So, God bless you and take care.
Yes, very good. Like to come back sometime soon.
Anytime.
Thank
Amen.
you.
We'll see you. God bless.
God bless you too.
Well, once again, my mind is blown, okay? But I, like you, am deeply, deeply committed to understanding this as best I possibly can. And because at the end of the day, the most important thing about all of this, right, is not just so much being right about the historical provenance, like, is this Jesus' burial cloth or not? It's the deeper questions, the deeper sort of claims on my heart and my mind that this relationship with God made man ultimately lead us to. And if this can help in that, if this can be an evangelical tool, if this can be a moment in history where God providentially has put us in a position to be able to discern some of these more wildly fascinating and potentially life-changing realities about this relic, I'm all for it. So God bless you all. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please check out the links below. I got a lot of great content down there for you. Previous interviews with Bob, as well as some other things for you. So God bless you, and I will see you next time. Don't forget to wonder.